the 258th meeting of the Lexington Veterans Association. Now, for anyone who kept score, last month I said it was the 254th. Well, Ed LaTurco has been delving into our archives, and he's been counting. And guess what he discovered? There were 4 uncounted programs. So he's made a correction. We are now up to 258. So it's just unbelievable. Hello, I'm Linda Dixon from the Lexington Veterans Association. Happy to welcome you. This is our final program for the summer. We take July and August off. So we're just so happy to see such a great crowd here. We will begin our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise, and Charlie Bevilacqua will lead us.
I'm honored to lead you in the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'd like to remind all honorary discharged veterans that now honorary discharged veterans not only are authorized, but they're requested to render a proper hand salute at the proper time, and this is one of the proper times to render a proper hand salute. Whether you're inside or building or outside, or whether you're covered or uncovered, unless you're wearing a New York Yankees hat. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. You may be seated.
Thank you, Charlie. Thanks to our good friends Starbucks in Lexington Center for the complimentary coffee, which goes so well with all the complimentary baked goods brought by so many volunteers. It really makes for a nice little social hour before our program. And thanks for all of you who put a little cash donation into our little basket up there. That's our operating fund, so we do appreciate it. Just a couple of announcements that we have today. First, we try to bring you items of interest to veterans, and our Veteran Services Officer, Gina Rada, has been working with Dave Treffs to try and come up with a monthly bulletin to just focus on one item each month that might be a service that is of interest to veterans. And Dave, where are you? Dave just wants to talk about this month's item of interest.
Well, each month we try to publish something of interest. I don't think I need it.
Yeah.
I think you do.
I do?
Yes.
Yes, put it right.
I need it. Generally, it's a quickie, a one-pager, and we were covering the veterans' benefits, the DD-214, and what your funeral director can do for you. It sounds a little dire, but it's good to plan ahead for those things. So this month's was going to be about the restrictions to your DD-214, and we'll be getting that out probably for next month. Now, I don't believe we're on the internet yet, but that will be the next step so that you can dial up these old issues on the internet or get them on the stack that we provide. The object is to give you information about your benefits. And if you have any questions, if there's a benefit you'd like us to research, you can just do that. So Benny Bull, Benny for benefits, Bull for bulletin.
Question? No,
Yes.
Are you going to maybe put that on the Lexington Veterans site so we can get it on?
Well, that's what I said. We'll put that on the site so that you get it. You can dial it up.
Yes, the answer is yes. How many people here have ever heard of fish? Not the kind you eat, but how many of you have, I will tell you what it means in a minute, how many of you have ever been clients and used fish? Fewer. It stands for friendly, independent, sympathetic help. And it's a wonderful service that all of us, including veterans, should know about. And we just wanted to invite the president of Lexington Fish, Dave Libman. Dave, to come on up. To just come up and very briefly talk about fish and this great service that's available to us all that we should know about. Dave is my neighbor too, by the way. You are, Dave.
For those of you who don't know about fish, we are a volunteer group of about 120 people, 100 drivers and 20...
Hold the mic up to your mouth.
Up there?
Yeah.
Hey, all right, thank you. We're a big, volunteer organization of about 120 people, 100 odd drivers and 20 phone schedules. Fish was started in 1970 or 72, somewhere back there, by a group of women who were part of inter-church group looking for good things to do. And they started Fish, as I say, back in the 70s. And some of the people who were with Fish at that time are just now retiring because they're too old to drive. So what we do is we provide transportation to dental and medical appointments for any Lexington resident. You don't have to own the property, you just have to be picked up in Lexington and taken home again. And we go anywhere that we have to go into Boston or now that things have changed, so a lot of trips to Wellesley and to Stoneham and so forth, but we're always available. It's a completely free, no charge service, and it's the volunteers cover all of the costs except for parking fees. Fish relies completely on all volunteers. We don't have any paid members and no paid help. That keeps our insurance costs down too for driving. And all you need to do to get a ride from Fish is to call our answering service, leave your name, address for the first time, and your phone number, and the details of your appointment, and somebody will, what happens then is that the answering service gives it to one of the phone people who sets up a schedule for the day. We do about somewhere over 100 rides every month, and just continually go. Some days, and they're not always the same day, obviously. We slide out to, some days there might be 2 rides, and some days there might be 12 rides. And if you think it's fun, try to schedule 12 rides with 3 drivers. It's a little difficult. But as I say, it's available to anybody. It's no charge. And you don't have to wait for the bus or anything else. You take it up to wherever you go, going and brought back again.
And Dave brought some brochures which are over on the table against the wall. Please feel free to pick one up. Thank you, Dave, for telling us.
In terms of the volunteerism, I told you what we can do, what Fish can do for all of you, but if anybody wants to become a volunteer driver or phoner, just let us know. We have the information over on the table, and all you have to do is call us and talk to somebody about what you might be able to do if you're interested.
Absolutely.
And, you know, but I did want to shout out to three places that aid Fish. One is, excuse me, Hancock Church, who handles our mail, they're our mail address. St. Bridget's, who gives us a use of their library meeting room every month for our monthly meeting of the directors, and somebody at the Fallen Church also. You know, and the number that's on there is the answering service, but they will give you, they'll get in touch with me anytime somebody wants to know. And we'll get, and if you want to become a volunteer, we'll be glad to have you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope somebody would, I hope some people in this room might be willing to sign up. It's a wonderful thing that we'd be doing for our fellow residents. Thank you, Dave. One final announcement. We have our fall program schedule ready. It's in print form. It was out there at the table. If we have any more left, there'll be some ready for you to pick up at our side table. It'll also be on our website, and you will be receiving notices of our programs. Our first program begins on the second Monday in September, which I think is September 11, if I'm not mistaken. And we will be back in business then. Now, let's get to our program. Okay, thanks for your patience. Let me introduce our two speakers, Elizabeth Price and Alex Whitlaw. Elizabeth and Alex are part of the Returning Veterans Program at the Bedford VA Medical Center. They offer a comprehensive program, a whole menu of services to assist newly returning veterans who are in transition. Even with all the benefits and the services that are offered to our returning veterans today, it can still be very challenging and very complicated for a veteran to access those services for a whole host of reasons, which Elizabeth and Alex are going to talk to you about. Now, Alex, for example, spent 24 years in the active service as a Marine, including a tour in Iraq, in the original invasion of Kuwait up into Iraq. And he came home with all sorts of emotional baggage. He took years to sort himself out. And now he works as a peer counselor, helping other veterans to make a smoother transition. Elizabeth Price earned an undergraduate degree from Quinnipiac University and a master's in social work from Boston College. It was while serving an internship at BC here at the Bedford VA that she became involved with the VA in 2006, and it led to a full-time job as a clinical social worker. She's been there ever since. Elizabeth and Alex help each returning veteran identify his or her specific challenges, and they prepare a tailored recovery plan to help them get back into post-deployment life. And here are Elizabeth and Alex to tell us about that important work. Please welcome them.
Thank you so much, Linda, for having us back. We really appreciate that wonderful intro. And I do have to say, this is really special because my parents are here. They're newly retired. My mom was a teacher for many years in Concord at the Cape, and my dad recently retired from 44 years in the Park Service, and they're just hanging out with us today. So Linda pretty much did our introduction for us. As she said, I've been a social worker at the VA in Bedford for quite some time, working specifically with veterans who have deployed and now are trying to sort out life after the military and after deployment. And so we're going to tell you a little bit about that and what we do over at the VA today. Do you want to introduce yourself and go to our next slide?
Linda did a wonderful job introducing us and who I am. I actually, when I was in Iraq, I still had about 4 years to go before I could retire when I came back. And it was during those 4 years where the struggle really started for the readjustment. And it still took a few years after that to finally get it. What I do at the VA essentially is, well, for one, I better not mess this up because Elizabeth's parents are in the office. She's my boss, so that's gonna really get me.
We've got 3 bosses in the audience now.
Anyhow, what I essentially do is one of the biggest issues with veterans of the VA has always been, you don't know where I've been, you don't know what I've done, how are you supposed to tell me how to live my life? Well, here's what we do is we have been there, we've done that, we've got all the medical charts, so they can't use the excuse with us. And so we try to determine what it is they're actually trying to say so we can work in conjunction with clinicians who can develop a more comprehensive treatment plan. Okay, so essentially what we're going to discuss today are some of the common challenges facing returning combat vets, barriers and tips in getting the help that they need, or we need, and VA resources and services that we can use to help them.
So first we're going to talk a little bit about who are these veterans. When I first started at the VA in 2006, a lot of the providers hadn't seen a young combat veteran in quite some time. Luckily we had been at peace for a while, so it was a little bit of a challenge, and some of the providers would even say to me like, oh, I think I can pick out this new combat vet because he's going to be this young, buff, 20-something-year-old with a crew cut in our waiting room. But the reality is, in Massachusetts, we don't have a large military base like California or Alaska. So Massachusetts and New England actually saw a lot of National Guard and Reserve Service members deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan after 9/11. So what does that actually mean? It means that this veteran population is really mixed. You could have someone who went into the military right in active duty after high school, and they are relatively young coming to see us for health care when they get out. Or we could have someone that didn't deploy until they were 30, 40, 50. I had 2 clients who deployed the end of Vietnam and in the beginning of the initial invasion in Iraq. So that's quite a drastic lifestyle difference of when you're being plucked out of your routine and your family and deploying overseas. So that was a little bit of the tricky readjustment parts in terms of what does that mean for these veterans. The other thing that we all know about the National Guard and Reserves is that people would come home from their deployment, but they were still in the military. They were still going to drill weekends, and they were still anticipating redeploying. So they were a little bit uncertain about coming to the VA and saying, geez, I'm not doing so well, or I can't sleep, or I'm using alcohol because I'm in pain. They really didn't want to say a lot of those things because they were hoping to redeploy again with their unit. So it was a drastic variety of veterans that we were seeing. The other thing, we know, even though the military, of course, is still majority males, more and more females have been entering the military. So therefore, we're seeing more and more females as patients at the VA. So we really had to be ready. What does that mean? What is that going to look like for healthcare and just the culture at the VA? And so that's a really unique change with the Iraq and Afghanistan veteran population. I've had a couple of clients that have deployed later in their life, and they're, like I said, in their 40s or 50s, and they also had children who were in the active duty military that deployed at the same time. So we had 2 generations of service members deploying at the same time, which again is a unique part of this conflict. So we're going to talk a little bit about readjustment, just painting the picture of what does that veteran look like, and the reality is it looks like a lot of different things. So I like this graphic. I put this on here specifically because a client of mine, when I first started at the VA, was trying to describe how he felt. And he was sitting in my office, and he had finished his commitment to the service, and he was now trying to figure out what to do next. And he said, I feel like I'm this little tiny person looking up this telephone pole with those signs going in every direction. My family thinks I should do one thing, my girlfriend thinks I should do another, I want to go to school, but I need to pay my bills. You know, I wish I was back in the military, I have no money. And he had all of these things on his list that were quite distressing to him, and was having a hard time figuring out where to start. And that's really what we work on with folks, is how to figure out just where to start afterwards. And that's a variety of areas. So when I see a client, when Alex sees a veteran for the first time, we want to see, how are you feeling? Do you have any physical injuries, any mental health issues? Are you able to pay your bills? Do you have a place to live? Do you have a job? Basic areas of their life functioning, which oftentimes don't get emphasized in the news, right? It's all about the major combat exposure or a severe blast injury. But we know a lot of people do really well during the deployment. They don't have a serious injury, but it's a major disruption in their life. And so these are just some of the areas that we want to talk with veterans about and make sure that nothing really completely falls apart when they get back.
Some of the other ones that Elizabeth briefly touched on were the employment, education, the housing, family, and essentially, what is your role now that you're back? Your family has gotten along just fine without you for the last 6 months, year and a half, however long you were gone. All of a sudden now you come back and try and reinsert yourself into the role you had before you left. It usually doesn't work too well. While you were gone, your spouse took over all the stuff not only they're used to doing, but all the stuff that you were doing. Children, yes, they want to know where mommy and daddy are gone, but they also have gotten on with their daily lives. When I deployed, my stepchildren were teenagers. My daughter, at the time, loved it because now I wasn't around there to chase certain individuals skulking around the house off. They were very shocked when I showed back up, I'll tell you that. But employment is a huge issue because now, and I'll get into this a little bit more further in the presentation, but it's not just a matter of getting a job. It's readjusting to how things operate out here in the real world versus how they operate in the military. And even in the military, it operates somewhat differently between peacetime on a base here or in the desert and combat. Education. I went back to school at 45. What a shock that was. Not only the culture of a college, but also dealing with younger students who were just out of high school. And in my case, I had a couple of people that were my age, but they had never been in the military. Housing, I think Elizabeth covered a little bit more of that, and the family. All right, some of the common barriers that we run across when we come back, regardless of whether you're coming back as a Guard member, straight back into civilian life, or in my case, you came back on active duty and you still had to do all the mopping up of everything that was going on. The stigma of mental health and seeking help. We run across this all the time, especially with younger veterans. They still have that high adrenaline. They want to go and do first responder jobs. They want to do something that to them is exciting. The problem is they get nervous if they mention that they have a mental health problem, even if they're getting it addressed, because they think that's going to bar them from being able to get these type of jobs. Also what happens is they just don't want to appear weak. No matter how many times in the military they say that, strength is seeking help and all these things, and they encourage you to go seek help. The sad reality is most won't because they're afraid of how it's going to affect their career, especially if they're a senior up in the ranks, senior enlisted or officers. They're going to be really nervous of how this is going to reflect upon them. Another issue, while in the service itself, you have the operation tempo, the constant deployments. So it's like, I don't want to, if I say I got a problem, they're not going to let me deploy, but I can't let my buddy deploy without me. You have all these different little things that pop up. The active duty versus a Guard or Reserve. This is another huge one that when you take into consideration the way they're comprised, veterans like to hang around veterans. We like to talk to each other. We have our own unique way of communicating. Usually it's not wording polite in polite company, but we all talk to each other a specific way. And we all understand where each other's coming from. So when you come back, if you're still in active duty, you still have all that camaraderie and everything and the shared experience, and you have some sort of a comfort you can go and talk to your buddies about. Guard and Reserve don't necessarily have that, because when they come back, their units are comprised of people from all over the geographical area, whereas active duty units are comprised of people from all over the country and in some cases the world. A good example of this would be the unit that I retired out of, was 25th Marines over in Devens. And one of our battalions we sent over to Iraq in 2007 or 8, I believe. Anyhow, this unit, unfortunately, it was a reserve unit out of Ohio, and unfortunately they took a lot of casualties. And it was really big in the news because a Marine Combat Brigade over there is one active duty battalion and one reserve infantry battalion. They're trained just as well as the active duty battalions are. They go through all the same workups. The active duty battalion took just as many, if not as more casualties as the reserve battalion. The reserve battalion made the news. Why? Because the active duty battalion, even though they had so many casualties, they were from all different communities throughout the country. So a community, you know, say Lexington may have had, unfortunately, one. Bedford, Lincoln, you know, it's nothing to them. Whereas with a reserve unit, you may have one, that same 3 people may all come from Lexington, may come from Lincoln, they may come from Bedford. So it's a greater impact upon that community. And as we all know, the news likes drama, so that's what they'll focus on. That debate became so intense that we had the battalion that's actually stationed here at Devens were on the rotation to deploy. And because of what happened to the other battalion, they weren't going to let them. The Pentagon was afraid of what the publicity would look like. Senators Kerry and Kennedy at the time both had to get involved and say, no, they're trained just as well, they can deploy the same as anybody else, and they eventually did. So again, when they come back, they're thrust back into their community when they may not necessarily have that camaraderie because their buddies they served with may be living in another state. A lot of units, I did a presentation for a unit last week, and most of the members were from New York and Connecticut, a few from Rhode Island and New Hampshire. Like 5 in the whole audience were from Massachusetts. So it ends up being a little bit of a struggle for them. So that's why we try and reach out to get all of them coming in. Then we have, as part of the employment side, translating your war zone skills to what a civilian skill is. This is probably one of the most difficult things that you can do when you retire from the military or when you get out. The reason being is that if you're in a technical job, it's a little bit easier to translate. If you're working on computers in an air-conditioned trailer in the middle of Iraq, you're probably going to be able to easily translate that into some sort of a resume out here in the community for some sort of IT job. If you're like me, and we're dumb enough to say, oh, I want something that's going to cause some adventure and become an infantryman, then that's a little harder to translate when you get out, especially when you've been doing it for 24 years. So you have to look into a little, obviously you can't say, well, yeah, I can fire all these different weapons and all blow stuff up. That's not going to generally be well received out in the community. So what I have to focus on is the leadership skills I gained. The leadership skills under extremely stressful situations, decision-making abilities. These are the intangible things that I'd have to go ahead and rely on and translate into some form of a resume. Again, whereas if you're a more technical field, it's a little easier to translate it. Just take out some of the acronyms and you're good.
So employment, again, as Alex is saying, a lot of it is about finding the right fit. So if you think about, I see several veterans that deploy, they love the military, even if it was horrific experience. They felt like they had a purpose, a clear mission, they were surrounded by other people that they trusted, and they had kind of a very purposeful day-to-day task. And then they get out, and they maybe don't have their degree yet, or as Alex said, their skills are a little bit tricky to sell to a civilian employer, and they'll say to me, I'm qualified to work at Starbucks. Is that it? Did I peak at age 26 years old where, like, what am I gonna do with my life? Where do I fit in next? And if someone doesn't have employment day to day, they're not able to pay their bills and they don't have somewhere to be, that might be when people start to get into trouble or get depressed or fall behind on their bills and spin their wheels a little bit. So we may see someone in our office that's kind of on the line where, you know, they are feeling a little bit depressed, they're a little bit behind on their bills, and so the treatment that we may recommend is actually going to see our job counselors, getting that person back into meaningful work so they feel like they have that mission again. It might not compare, because nothing will compare, right? But it's at least something that that person can feel good about. And our employment services at Bedford are huge, because veterans want to work. They have great work ethic and lots of skills, as you all know. And so finding the right match for that can be a real positive in someone's recovery, for sure.
One other aspect of the unemployment is, even if you're highly skilled and highly trained, due to whatever you encountered over in a combat zone, you may not want to do that job anymore, which makes it even more difficult to come back and try and transition to a job. For instance, combat medics, because of the type of stuff that they see, they may not necessarily want to come back and work in an emergency room. So again, it becomes a matter of trying to translate what those skills are to something that's going to be comfortable for the veteran to do, and something that the veteran's going to be able to relay to an employer. On relationship, as if anybody ever figured out how a relationship really works. But again, for a returning veteran, it becomes a little bit more unique, because there are things that we remember, things we've done, things we've lived with, that we really can't tell or explain to the closest people to us. I'm not sure exactly how to explain it, but as your significant other starts witnessing the things that are starting to overcome you, whether they're a little subtle or not, or you're starting to, as we say, self-medicate whatever you take, whatever you need to get those nightmares out of your head and sleep for just a few hours. As you start delving into these things, your significant other's sitting there wondering what can he or she do? And when the answer is always nothing, and they don't understand it, and the veteran's not good at explaining it, or the veteran just doesn't want to explain it, that creates a lot of turbulence, if you will, within the relationship. In many cases, it will lead to a divorce. I'll tell you right now, it led to mine. And that was just because lack of communication. It wasn't because we didn't want to speak to each other, it's just we didn't know how to. And the VA actually has specific programs for that help veterans figure out how to discuss it. A quick example of this was when I come back, there was a group of us, we were having a barbecue. Nice Chesapeake Bay, blue crab, and all the nice beer you could have and everything. And we just started reminiscing about things we had done over there. What we did realize is that our loved ones were listening to us. And when we turned around and saw the look on their faces, things that we had just been laughing about and thought were amusing, they were horrified. And it really brings home the point that, you know, it's an entirely different mindset. Over there, you have to have a different mindset.
And let me guess, the language wasn't too clean at that barbecue.
Well, let's just say I wouldn't put it on a college thesis.
The other comment I'll make about relationships that we see all the time at the VA is that while their significant other is deployed, the people at home are like checking the calendar off. Oh, 100 days, 90 days. It's going to be great. As soon as they get back, everything's going to fall back into place. And the service member, of course, tells me, well, I assumed everything would be fine. Let's go back to the way it was before. But both parties have changed a little bit. And like Alex said, they need to get to know each other all over again. I tell people, go on a few dates, you know, don't expect things to be exactly as they were. Those expectations is like this big party, yay, the person's home, and then it was like, oh my gosh. You know, for the veteran, they might just want to be with their military buddies, or they may not really be opening up or communicating, and the spouse has all kinds of expectations, and as Alex said, is trying to figure out how to help. The other thing that we see is with this war, these wars, there's more access to technology. So for those of you that deployed in other eras, it was letters, right? And if you didn't get a letter, you just waited till you got one. With this war, we have people that, depending on their jobs and where they are, have access to phones and the internet pretty regularly. So the people at home who are, you know, desperately wanting to connect have the access. They can get telephone calls or see, you know, write to each other on Facebook. And so one of the things that we learned about that is that's great in a lot of ways, because if you're home and you hear from that person, you know they're okay, and you know, you hear their voice, you can talk with them. But at the same time, if there's an issue at home, somebody's child is not doing well in school, there's a leak in the roof, they're telling the service member who's in Afghanistan that can't do anything about it. So that's another stress for that person. They may have to quickly hang up the phone because they're getting mortared or something.
I ran into that.
The other piece is, anyone here on Facebook? Use Facebook or social media? Great. So what I heard a lot from especially younger veterans who had a girlfriend or boyfriend when they deployed is that they would have access to the internet during their deployment. They would go on Facebook, they'd start looking around, and they saw their girlfriend out at a party with this other guy. And they're like, oh my gosh, what's happening to my relationship? But meanwhile, I'm going on a mission to search for, you know, terrorists within an hour. So it's like a double-edged sword of technology. And so we saw a lot of people that had a lot of stress during that process with their relationship, which isn't unusual to other conflicts, but is just, I think, another stressor.
As I found out months after I came back, there's also the other side of that coin with technology where your family back home. As Elizabeth was saying about phones, since I was the senior enlisted in my unit, I had a satellite phone that I would let my Marines, whenever we had a chance, use. Myself personally, every time I picked that sucker up, we started getting into a firefight. It happened once when I was on the phone with my wife. Needless to say, hung up pretty quick. Honey, I gotta go, I'm gonna be busy. The next time it happened when I was talking to my parents. The third time was with a colleague back in the States over something. After that, I threw the phone away, so I'm never touching this thing again. So it's, again, on my end, it is kind of amusing. You know, here I'm trying to hold a conversation and some idiot's shooting at me. Okay. But back here, all I know is my wife was freaking out because she had no idea what was going on. And at that time, news was focusing on some of the big things like hitting Baghdad. They weren't focusing on a lot of stuff what took to actually get to Baghdad. So that was one, like I said, that was where technology failed in my view. Another thing that happened was, I'm drawing a blank. I was thinking about it while you were talking. But yeah, we can go.
So one of the ways, unfortunately, that we see veterans at the VA for the first time is not because they want to get their flu shot, because they're taking care of themselves. It's unfortunately because they're coming in to our detox unit. So they've been struggling with a substance abuse issue. They have not gotten help for it, some of it because of that stigma or just thinking that they didn't have a problem. And we see them come through for detox, and that's the first time that they come in for treatment. And as you know or have seen in the news, there's a lot of opiate use right now. We have a major problem with heroin, and unfortunately, we see all different reasons that people use, but the part we're hoping is to get them into treatment. So if someone has an injury while they're in the military, a lot of times it's treat them enough so they can continue to do their job. And they may get out of the military and might be still taking that medication, or they're not taking care of their injuries. So that self-medication we talk about in two ways. That could be because they're in pain and they're trying to treat their pain themselves and be their own doctor. Or it could be maybe they can't sleep that well, so they have a couple of beers before they go to bed, which turns into a couple of more beers, which turns into lots of beers all the time. And then they're finally coming in, and that's also a factor for a lot of people that interferes in their relationship, their ability to hold a job. So at Bedford, we definitely have some treatment for substance abuse, and unfortunately, sometimes that's where we see people start to really say, okay, I need to figure out why I'm using so much and start the treatment for those issues. Has anyone heard of military sexual trauma before? Yeah? So that's something, again, that we're trying to ask about, talk about. It's sexual harassment, sexual assault while in the military. And it's not just with females. A lot of males are also the victims of sexual assault, but again, because of stigma and shame, it's not reported or really addressed as much as we would like it to be, so people can get treatment as early as possible. It's a complicated dynamic when you maybe get assaulted by someone that outranks you. How do you report that? That's really uncomfortable, especially if you're in a life and death danger zone situation. So we know that this happens. It's probably happened for a very long time, and it's something that we're trying to get more education about, encourage people to access treatment, and it really is a culture that needs to be changed a little bit within the military, but it's something, again, that we want to just note as part of the issues that people can face when they get back. You probably see images on the news about different blast injuries, traumatic brain injury. You see a bomb, it hits a car, a truck, or a building, and people get real thrown around by these blasts. And with this conflict, people are surviving these. Our service members are surviving these at way higher rates than they would have in other wars. Can anyone think about why that might be?
Armor protection.
The armor, right. We have much better advanced, or more advanced gear now. We also have quicker access to medical care. So things that might, really injure or kill someone in other wars, we can get that person to medical quicker. They may, lose a limb or have some concussion and have a severe injury and have to come home. But there's also the mild side of traumatic brain injury, which is basically a concussion. So if you think about here, you have a kid playing a sport, they have a concussion in a hockey game. The treatment might be pull them out of the game for a couple of weeks, limit their time on the computer, give them rest, lots of rest, and they'll be fine, they'll recover from that. Well, we know in the war zone, someone gets a concussion, they're not hurt badly enough to go home, but they're probably not going to get rest either. And so when we see people coming back and they may have had multiple times where they hit their head off the side of a truck or in the head with debris or something from a blast, they likely didn't have the recuperation time. So now we're dealing with maybe migraines or issues with their memory. They go back to school and it's hard to stay on track with classes. So that's something that's a little bit more, I think we have a little bit more awareness of with this particular war as well. We'll go to the next slide. So does this look familiar to anyone, all this gear? So one of the #1 complaints that our primary care doctors see in our clinics are complaints about the musculoskeletal issues. Back pain, neck pain, knee pain, ankle pain. So if someone's carrying that much gear all the time, in and out of vehicles, depending on where they are, could be lots of on foot, their job could require them to have more gear. Men and women, that is a lot of strain on the skeleton, right? So we see, again, a lot of young people with chronic pain, and our providers are puzzled about how do we approach dealing with this for a young person who has maybe all of this pressure on their skeleton. We actually invited the Marines to come and talk with our doctors at Bedford so they could put on the jackets and feel the weight and feel the helmet and figure like, oh my gosh, that's a lot on your neck. That's really a strain. Because these are common challenges, and as we all know, if you're not feeling great, you don't get a good night's sleep and your back's constantly bugging you and you've got a migraine, that makes it really hard to go to work every day and be in a good mood. And so if someone is dealing with all of these things, it can be quite uncomfortable.
If you look, you see here, this pack this guy's carrying is probably anywhere from 80 to 120 pounds. So that is no, and this rocket right here that's called an AT4, that's about, I want to say it's about 8 pounds. And that's a single use. So every time you want to use it, you got to pick up an entirely new tube. So as you can see, that stuff adds up real quick. And yes, everything Elizabeth described, I have. And then here's the IED stuff, the blast for not only physical injuries, burn injuries, concussive injuries, so TBIs, pretty much every horror you can think of. And then one that's not generally talked about much, but Elizabeth and I push it with our veterans, is all the burn pits that we have, both in Iraq and Afghanistan. Everything, let's just say there is no version of an EPA over there. You burn any and everything that there is, to include human waste, biomedical waste, garbage, trash, food, whatever. And as you can see now, they're wearing masks. They're a little bit luckier than my crew was. We didn't have those unless we wore a scarf over our face. But you're inhaling all this stuff, and you're literally standing right over them. So while it made to 20 the 25-year-old may not mean a hill of beans right now. When you get to be about my age, it all catches up. My body reminds me every day of all the stupidity of my youth. So it develops lung problems, develops respiratory problems. There's no telling what pathogens we were inhaling over there. And then, of course, the ammunition is depleted uranium. So now we have radioactive stuff that we're invested with. So this thing that Elizabeth and I push a lot of, and it's a VA program called the Airborne Hazards and Burn Pit Registry. And what this is sort of like the modern day version of the Agent Orange Registry. Veterans will come in, depending on how many deployments you have, it can take anywhere from 45 minutes if the website wants to work, to a couple of hours. And then it asks all these general questions of each place you were deployed to. And the idea is to get some sort of a tracking so that not necessarily we can find out what you were doing, but if you, and you were all in the same area and you're developing the same type of illnesses, then we can start looking for a common denominator and figure out a way to hopefully cure it. So we are always pushing this, and Elizabeth will refer veterans over to me all the time, and I'll sit down there with them and show them how to access it and how to operate it, and then they can take off and go finish it on their own.
And this is quite distressing. Just like with Agent Orange, the service members don't have a choice whether they breathe that in or not. That's their job, and there's no way, how do you get around that, you know? So it is a concern. It's just another factor that, that we want to educate people about so they can get treatment, and at least we can see what this is going to mean down the road. So transitioning a little bit to the mental health side of things. So you saw in the picture before, this soldier had all their gear on their back, really weighing them down. And we put this image in because, again, this is how a lot of our clients describe the weight they carry now. It's more of the anxiety, the stress. This says depression, stress, insomnia, anger, flashbacks.
Nightmares,
Yep.
panic attacks.
So I wanted to spend a few minutes on actually defining what post-traumatic stress is for you, because that word is used a lot. And we've described a lot of areas where people can hit speed bumps along the way. But a lot of people and a lot of the news talk about post-traumatic stress. What actually is it? How does someone get it? So we're going to spend a few minutes on that. And I wanted to give you the exact definition. This is out of the DSM, which is our diagnostic manual for mental health. And you can see that, you know, the criteria really has to be a life-threatening event happening. So they have to have gone through that event. The other thing is they have to have symptoms from each of these categories. So the re-experiencing symptoms is often, people will describe those as a flashback. That event that they went through, feeling like it's happening right now, 5 years later, today in this library, where there's this tape that plays continuously for them in their mind of that very life-threatening event all the time as if it's happening again. So the re-experiencing part of it. Avoidance is another symptom where people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to acknowledge it. Don't bring anything up that reminds me about it, because it causes extreme distress and anxiety. The negative thoughts is really that depression, having a lot of negative thoughts about themselves, about the event, a lot of hopelessness feelings. And the last is the hypervigilance, feeling on guard all the time, feeling unsafe all the time. Well, when you think about that, that's actually really helpful on deployment. You're looking through the world with a lens of safety, right? I always have to be on guard because someone's trying to shoot me through this window and that guy has a bomb and I could be driving into the enemy zone right now. But when you get back, after some readjustment time, for some people that gets worse, where it gets to be all the time. Never feel like they can turn that switch down a little bit, and their body can't tell the difference between when it's a real dangerous situation and when we're at the Lexington Library with you nice folks.
I ran into that as soon as I came back and started driving again. That was one of the hardest things I had to adjust to, was realizing that the cops over here I have to obey. Over there, hopping curbs and sidewalks is not a problem because hopefully you're avoiding a bomb. Over here, they get a little upset if you try that.
You can't shoot at them either. They don't like that.
Yeah, and you can't shoot back.
Yeah. So this is the actual criteria where people have these symptoms for more than a few months, and it starts to really interfere in their ability to live their day every day. You can go to the next slide. So for the average population, you can see the statistics here. About 60% of men and 50% of women will experience a traumatic event. But actually, only about 7 to 8% will go on to develop a post-traumatic stress diagnosis. So what's the difference? Well, if you think about anyone here has been in maybe a bad car accident over their lifetime of driving, perfect drivers in here? So for example, say you're in a car accident, you get hit at a stop sign, and it's a pretty bad accident. You might feel some anxiety about that and a really hard time driving again. Maybe you knew you got hit from the right by a black van. Well, next time you see a black van, any black van, you might feel really anxious that that van is just going to not stop at that stop sign. And it might be quite distressing. You might have a hard time then with, a bunch of vans, even if they're not black. But for most people, they keep driving, they get some rest, they get some sleep, right? And over time, they're back on the road. For people that go on to develop post-traumatic stress, it just kind of spirals for them, where again, not just that black van is when they have anxiety, but it's now every van, and then every car, and then every stop sign, and then driving all together. And then they're not leaving their house, or their anxiety is constant, where they're really not trusting themselves driving at all, and it starts to interfere. So it can kind of take a different pathway. PTSD is not new, right? We know this. This has existed for years. And if you look at research through the different conflicts, which you can see, it just was called different things, but basically the same symptoms. Dating back to the 1700s here, through World War I, shell shock, which originally was thought to be someone who was close to a shell exploding, right? But then they started to see that even someone who was not in close proximity, but experienced other types of combat, maybe getting shot at, getting in an accident, they were having those same symptoms. So they started to really look at what that was like. And what do we know about previous generations of veterans? People didn't talk about these things. Mental health was not a field that really was encouraged. We didn't encourage veterans to come in for care, really. And so you can see it wasn't until 1982 that we actually had diagnosis and treatment, and it was a real acknowledged condition, just like that back condition. They're both injuries from war, and let's present them as such.
And by the way, archaeologists have uncovered archaeological evidence that this was going on in the Roman legions too. So it gives you an idea even further back how far it goes.
Here's some statistics that the National Center for PTSD through the VA has up on their website about the different conflicts throughout the years of the statistics of people that we know may have a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress. But of course, my belief is that these are probably not as high as they might have been. So are we actually getting accurate reports, especially from other era veterans? You can go to the next slide, Alex.
All right, this gives you an idea of how returning veterans see the world and how you may view it. You'll notice this is what it would look like to you driving down the road, unless you're on 495 or 128, then it's ridiculous. However, when I drive down the road or fellow returning veterans, this is what it feels like to us. Everywhere that you see here, we're looking, if there's trash, if the gravel's been disturbed, if any type of a bag, any type of mound, rocks, anything, or even a patch. We all complain about Massachusetts covering the potholes. Over there, when they cover them, it's because they put a bomb under them. So that's what we're constantly looking. Every day, on my way into work and on my way home, it's almost a white knuckle event. Because even after all these years, this is still how I'm reacting to things. My wife and my new wife and I, when we go out to dinner, even she knows that I have to sit in a certain spot just because of the hypervigilance that Elizabeth mentioned earlier.
So this is quite distressing if this is someone's commute to work every day and then they walk through the door and their anxiety is already really high and they have a deadline and their boss is on them for something and they're running late. That can be sometimes where people don't handle those situations as well and get fired from a job. And they haven't recognized yet that they need to relearn how to drive here. and that it's not all or nothing. That even though this may have been a reality in one environment, how to balance that that's not the reality here. We have terrible drivers, but the likelihood that this is the outcome is smaller. So they have to figure out with their bodies and their brains how to regulate that.
This is almost like the Bourne Bridge on a Friday afternoon trying to get to the Cape.
I think we should do it. So this is a video that we love. This is a Vietnam veteran that just talks about how the norm after Vietnam was that you just pretended these things didn't exist, that no one really acknowledged them, and it wasn't encouraged and talked about the way it is today. So it really encourages us that we want to have a different approach with the veterans that we're seeing come home now. We've learned a lot, of course, and so we just really like him. He gives us a little 2-minute briefing that I hope you guys will like.
Yeah, unfortunately,
No, it's okay.
We'll try it this way, we'll try to make it straight through. Working fine.
That's right. You know what? Scrap it, Alex, so we don't run out of time.
No, all right. All right. Role in civilian life. What do I do when I come back? What do I do when I get out? This is a question that we touched upon a little earlier in the presentation. There's so many different things that are available. It's just depending upon what you're willing to do to help yourself achieve them, essentially. Some of the things that I've encountered, a lot of things that I have encountered with fellow veterans and veterans that I work with, veterans that Elizabeth works with. Again, jobs, schools, significant others. Let's take school, going back to school, regardless of your age. Like I said, I was a lot older when I went back. Even a 22-year-old who goes back to college, a lot of things, and I've worked with them in a college situation to try and help them. It's hard for them to adapt. And again, this goes also the civilian versus military stuff. In my experience, when the professor was reading out the syllabus, one of the first things they would tell you is no texting in class. And I can guarantee you at Bet a Paycheck that some knucklehead would be sitting over there in a chair texting, the teacher just told me I can't text. And they thought it was funny. To somebody from the military, that ain't funny. You know, in our world, you follow orders or people are going to die or get injured. So there's stuff like that. There's also the misconception by a lot of traditional college students that think what we've done over there is like a video game. And it's not. A lot of video games nowadays feature historical landmarks from over in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're running around playing with their buddies thinking it's all funny. It's not somebody who's actually been there and done that. It also works both ways too. A lot of veterans don't work as well as I think some of them could or should at re-assimilating. If you're walking around a college campus with all your camouflage on, and especially in today's environment, you are probably going to raise an alarm with somebody on the faculty. If you're withdrawn, irritable, combative, which is naturally, especially for a Marine, that's natural, but when you're suffering from PTSD, it becomes even worse because then it can be interpreted as more threatening to someone, which in turn will lead to a lot of problems that you may not have been intending to threaten someone, but if that's how they're perceiving it and that's how it gets reported, the veteran a lot of times is going to face the punishment, which to the veteran's point of view, hey, it's unfair, pardon my language, but the civilian world just screwed me again. And then it just causes this vicious cycle. I went through something similar myself when I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, and I don't know how many times I was told, you're not in the military anymore. Even when I was a manager expecting people below me to do what they're getting paid to do. It was quite a shock, which leads into the unemployment side. where the work ethics in the veteran's view, right or wrong, is considerably different than it is in the civilian world. In the civilian world, if the workday ends at 4:30, at 4:25 the computer's cold and somebody's walking out the door. In the military, the work ends when the mission's done. End of story. Which also leads to the mission getting accomplished is teamwork. There's no I's. You know, everybody else is encouraged to be an individual and have their own ways of doing things. But when you have a task or a mission, everyone is expected to pull his or her weight to get it accomplished in a timely fashion. Out in the civilian world, a lot of times, working on projects, you're dealing with everybody's personal viewpoints on things. And, you know, some are a little bit more driven than others. Some have different ideas. Some are more demanding than others. There's not a clear chain of command, if you will, as there is in the military, all the way to the lowest level. So this creates a lot of problems for veterans. Oh, these civilians are lazy. They don't want to get nothing done. Well, no, they just have a different way of going about doing things than what you're used to. What Elizabeth and I are always encountering with veterans is we're trained to see things in black and white. Out here, everything's gray. And it usually doesn't translate very well to our vision when we're not looking at it gray. And also, again, back to a little bit with the significant others. We help try and get them to open up as much as they're comfortable with, letting their significant other know what's going on so that their significant other can help them in whatever they need done. Yeah, one of the successful things that I've done in my marriage now that I didn't do last time was I talked to my wife. She doesn't know the details, and I don't talk about all the stuff that happened over there. But she knows enough to when I need to be left alone just to go ruminate a minute and then come back and then re-engage into whatever we were doing. I said she's mindful. We'll walk into a restaurant. She's like, oh, she knows where I prefer to sit, and she'll be okay, fine. But that's the type of communication we have. If you don't have that, then you're going to end up to where I was before and divorced, and not very happily. Let's see, students, providers. You go in and see it, whether you're going to see a clinical clinician for mental health or even for something wrong with physical. You're not going to, in the military, you don't go complaining, you suck it up. So you don't go in there for, you're bleeding in the arm. Unless your limb is hanging off by one vein, you don't really go into sick hall for it. So out here, though, you're expected, it could be leading to something else that you're expected to identify and help that provider identify so they know how to treat you. We don't want to talk to them. Again, like I said at the very beginning, where you don't know what I've been through, you weren't there, you have no idea, so how are you going to help me? Again, this is where the peers come in, because we do know, and then we can help translate what's been going on or what you actually want to be telling someone. And then again, providers are, at the VA, I will tell you that I started in 2006, and it is considerably different now than it was when I first started. They had no idea really what to do with us, Iraq Afghan vets. So yes, this was before Elizabeth got there.
Changed everything.
Yeah, that's right. But no, I mean, seriously, they had no idea. Now there's programs designed for all of these little things we're discussing to help veterans if they want to and if they want to put the work into it. There is no magic pill. It's not going to go away overnight. You get what you put into it, just like anything else worthwhile in life. And last but not least, on dealing with civilians. One of the things, one of the things that really irks veterans is what is perceived the lack of knowledge amongst the civilian population about what veterans are. Yes, we hear all the thank you for your service, welcome home, support our troops, all this stuff. What does this translate to? Well, for an employer, I've got to go in and tell an employer that, hey, yeah, I really want to work for you, but I have to take time off to go to the doctor and get my appointments. Heaven help them if I mention I got PTSD. Because all they're going to think about is what they've seen on the news when some veteran's gone crazy and shot something up. So there's that dilemma. Then there's the dilemma, again, about taking time off, wanting to address the issues. How much time are you going to be allowed to take off, and how is that going to affect your coworkers and their resentment of you? Then there's just simple things. Like, what is the difference between Memorial Day and Veterans Day? Yes, it's great for having barbecues, but a lot of them don't understand that one is for those who are fallen and one is for those who are still living. And it really irks veterans when this stuff happens, which again causes a disparity amongst the veteran and civilian communities. So we try to bridge that gap and help bring the two together and figure it out. And I'm still trying to do that, but at least I'm being more successful with it.
So this graphic is interesting. I don't know if you can read it. It says, "Great to have you home, bro, and not a scratch on you," right? So this is like the college kid that's like, mom's still paying all their bills, they don't do their own laundry. And they see their buddy who came home and they just want to get drunk with them, and they're like, "Oh, you look great. You have all your arms and legs." And this is not to say that veterans are a time bomb at all, but it's to say that that person might be struggling with something that this guy can't see or understand. And so we see people all the time, they get home and their peers, their friends are like, "Oh, did you kill anyone? Did you see anyone dead? What'd you have to do?" And those are, as we know, just not the questions. Those are totally inappropriate and not very sensitive questions, but people ask them all the time of their buddies and their friends, and not really understanding how that could affect them and what they might be going through.
When I first got home, I went home on leave to Texas and visited my mother, who at the time was a teacher's assistant for a fifth grade special ed class. So she wanted me to come in there and talk to the students and all this good stuff. Came in uniform, the very first question I got was, "How many did you kill?" And this is from a 5-year-old special needs student. So you can imagine how frustrating it gets when adults are asking you these questions.
So just to wrap up, I wanted to talk a little bit about the VA. If you're not familiar with it, we've talked about all the different areas that we know veterans struggle with and a little bit about what we do at the VA. But since we're right down the road, we figured we would tell you about it as well and really try to answer any questions that you guys have about the services. And so if you've never been to a VA, it's beautiful, come visit us. But at the same time, veterans who are eligible can get care for something minor, like a flu shot, a checkup, annual physical, blood pressure medication, or if they have significant health issues, we have care for all specialties, including geriatric, hospice, dental, all kinds of areas of recovery.
I'm putting together two things that you said. The wonderful care you just described, and the fact that a person has to ask for leave. A person has to ask for leave to go for a medical appointment. To what extent can a person who returns and takes a civilian job get an evening appointment?
Good question. And the answer is it really varies. So this is something that we know. Our veterans are working, they're in school, they're parents, that it's not always convenient for them to come to the VA every Tuesday at 2 o'clock for an appointment. So we're trying to be more flexible and figure out what will best meet the needs of our population. I can also tell you that a lot of people are really ambivalent about getting care. So on the one hand, we see people that come in the evenings all the time. On the other hand, we see people that don't show up to their appointments all of the time. They either have other things that are taking priority in their life, or they're not quite ready to come in maybe for therapy or to see the doctor. They're not quite ready for that. So it is a challenge, and it is something that we hope we see expanded. But we do offer, between the VA and the Vet Center, a little bit of extended hours. It depends. That is a challenge for sure. So I know we'll have time for questions. I'm just going to run through the last 2 slides and then we'll wrap up, just in case anything gets answered here. So we talk about regular medical care, but we also have expanded a lot of services to support veterans in those other areas of functioning that we've been talking about. A job search, housing, some financial counseling, getting active, and getting together with their peers. So obviously Alex's position, there's lots of group meetings. If a veteran really misses their buddies and they don't feel comfortable with anyone other than veterans, they could join a social group through the VA and maybe do an activity or go to the gym together. And that may encourage them to feel a little bit more supported to start actually getting the help that they need. For veterans who are eligible, which I'm happy to talk with people about separately because it's a little bit of a detailed explanation, if a veteran's eligible for the VA, it's usually either free or really low co-payments. So we want to make sure people who are veterans understand what the cost would be for them, because we see a lot of people who are either newly retired, newly out of the military, and they're actually entitled to this benefit and they weren't even aware that it exists for them. This is a listing of some of the services we have specifically for mental health and substance abuse. If a veteran has recently come back from a deployment, they have 5 years where anything related to their deployment is free care. So again, a very different attitude than we had with other conflicts, where the VA was not very welcoming. Here we're actively trying to get veterans to sign up and take care of any combat-related issues right away. The sooner we can get them in for treatment, hopefully the better outcome they'll have later in life. And the last resource I'll mention that should be talked about everywhere, we talk about it everywhere we go, is the suicide prevention efforts. We know that suicides happen every day with veterans, and it's just an unacceptable situation, especially when there is help available. So one of the efforts is this campaign to have this crisis hotline number plastered everywhere, and have it something that people are talking about, asking their friends. And if someone is in a crisis situation and they're thinking of hurting themselves or killing themselves, they can call this hotline completely anonymously, and usually on the other end is not only a VA employee, but for the most part, a veteran. That's the counselor on the other end that can actually connect them directly to VA care. Or if they don't want to say who they are, they can still call, get some support, and hopefully they'll be a little bit more encouraged next time. And this receives thousands of calls. We have texts, we have online ways that people can communicate with counselors in an effort for people to acknowledge that this is happening and that there is help available. And the last thing I'll mention, and then I swear we're done. What's that? Yes, is that if you're interested in becoming a volunteer at the VA, that's a huge plus. We love having volunteers. We love having veterans who volunteer. There's all kinds of jobs. We have Gresh, who's a star volunteer that's always out talking about the VA, and it's really a wonderful program and a way to get involved right here locally. So if people are interested in becoming a volunteer at the VA, we'd love to talk to you more about that as well.
I know you have lots of questions. You need to use the microphone if you have a question. Ed has one in the back, and I guess we're going to use Ed's. Okay, start there.
This is not a question, it's an observation. And that is the issue of PTSD, as far as I'm concerned, is a correctly perceived sense of helplessness. And it is true because when you're in combat, you are helpless. Whereas you can do all sorts of things that are crazy and dangerous, but you don't feel helpless. And then when you get recurrence of this stuff, you're still helpless. And that just grinds it in. You can't get away from it.
I just want to thank the VA for their excellent work. I would like to say that I'm a World War II veteran. I get my prescriptions through the VA. All I have to do is phone when I need a refill, and they mail them to us. And the price is right. It's very low. And it's a wonderful service. We all can really use it. Thank you.
Yeah, I will, while we're waiting for the phone to the next questioner, I will say that I've used both VA and civilian healthcare up here for surgeries, what have you. And I will say that the care is exactly comparable with the VA, just a lot cheaper for me than it is going out in the civilian community.
Yep.
So all the horror stories you hear are not correct.
And I'll make a comment on this gentleman's comment about that helplessness, and that is a theme that we see a lot when it comes to post-traumatic stress. And part of the challenge of recovery is trying to get that sense of control. That person may not have had the control in that situation, and therefore they're trying to figure out how to regain that back home. A very good point.
We know that many people, well, not many, but people don't experience or have suppressed the PTSD for a number of years until there's a trigger. So you have very many who are coming in, say from Vietnam, or say from the early, say Desert Storm, who have had denial. Oops.
question. Actually, the largest population of veterans that we see coming into the VA are Vietnam veterans right now. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And one is because a lot of people are retiring. So they might be looking for health care, but they also aren't as busy. So we know a lot of veterans, when they came back from Vietnam, started working many jobs, all hours, right? And some of it might have been for that reason, for the avoidance. So when things really quiet down, kids are out of the house, they're retired, some of the stuff starts to be more problematic because they aren't able to avoid it as much. The other piece is, after 9/11, that was very triggering for a lot of veterans who had experienced combat. And so for them, they were coming in having very intense symptoms after 9/11 because it was a trigger a little bit later for them.
Hi, I just wanted to mention, a lot of you know me in the room, but may not know that I'm now the executive director of the congressionally authorized nonprofit affiliate of the Bedford VA Hospital. And with all my work with veterans over the year through town celebrations, I have been amazed to learn about the quality of not only services that they offer at Bedford, but research. And so, for example, just to emphasize what you've heard today, Bedford is ranked second nationally for mental health services. And we are actually working on a project about telling stories, which you talked about before, that was developed by Benjamin Patton, who's the grandson of General George Patton. So anybody who happens to be on Martha's Vineyard this summer, on August 13th, we're having an event. We're looking to raise $255,000 to pilot a program which will then be able to be rolled out throughout the VA network. And that's one of the things that I've learned that Bedford does. There's so many quality services here. Many of the things that they develop at Bedford then become the model for the nation. So this particular project, Benjamin Patton will be here, and we'll also be previewing Ken Burns' mini-series that he's going to be doing in the fall about Vietnam. And his director will be at the event and things. So we hope we'll see you there. But what I want you to know, and I'm happy to talk to any of you, and any of you who come to Bedford should come see me in Building 14, that what we are getting for our dollars here in Bedford is not only incredible services, but also incredible research and education that has implications throughout the country.
Okay, next over here, and then you're next. Anybody on this side?
I'd like to know what programs the military here at the VA has for the returning veteran to help him to find a job. Often these returning veterans languish and do not get full-time appropriate employment and training for employment.
So good question. At the VA in Bedford, we see veterans who are in a couple of different stages of unemployment. What I mean by that is they may have been working and lost a job, or their job wasn't there for them when they got back. And they're ready to go. They just haven't been able to maybe get their resume the way they want it, or get the interviews that they need. So there are job counselors at Bedford that will help someone, coach them with resume writing, interview skills, and has some affiliation with different organizations that we know we're looking to hire veterans and that have openings. It's a tough job market. The other side of the spectrum is people that may have been unemployed for quite some time, or may have actually been in the hospital for quite some time, dealing with a medical issue, dealing with a mental health issue, newly sober. So at Bedford, we have a couple of transitional work jobs where they may work at the VA for a stipend just to get practice back in the workforce, dealing with bosses, dealing with coworkers, getting to work on time. And so that's more of the transitional work field.
What kinds of educational training programs do you have over at the VA that train the veterans in things like IT and computers and areas like that would give them more readily a job on the outside?
Okay, in answer to your question, one of the...
Would you repeat the question?
Okay, the question was, what programs essentially does VA have to increase a veteran's education or skill set to get a job? Is that essentially the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
A job on the outside of the
Right. What we have, in addition, sometimes we get grants for various certifications and things that we can send veterans to. But the biggest one, and this is one that I work with personally, and actually have been personally in it, It's called the Vocational Rehabilitation and Education Program. And what this is it's a program that helps you, it looks at the whole picture of the veteran. It looks at what their education level currently is, what their skill sets are, what have they done in the past. It looks at what their physical concerns are, disabilities. It looks at things like, in my case, they looked at age. What can I reasonably retrain at and start brand new at my age? They look if a Corey is an issue, they look into that. And what they do is they take all this information in accordance with the veteran, and they work on it. It's a program where the disease in this case is lack of an occupation, not necessarily just a job, but an actual occupation or a career. And so they come up with a treatment plan on how to solve this disease, which may include, and most often does, sending a veteran back to school. And that could be a 4-year degree at universities, it could be a 2-year degree at community colleges, it could be certificate programs, it could be, in some cases, I should back up, the main criteria for being in the program is being service connected, 20% or higher. And then one of the biggest things within that program is to figure out what is it that they can be retrained at that's not going to re-aggravate or make their conditions worse. All right, so if it's a physical injury, it's a little easier to work with. In my case, I had a bad back, so everything I wanted to do involved physical labor. They said no. But there was another degree that was kind of central to many things I wanted to do that they said, yes, we will send you to school for that. And I went back to school full time for that degree. It just depends, but the program is out there, and again, it just depends on all the conditions and the circumstances that the veteran has. If there's a mental health condition, say, that's preventing this person from being able to get a successful career, then the VA, since it's a VA program, not only do we have counselors working on the education and the job side, but they're also required to work with mental health counselors to try and come up with a three-pronged approach to trying to fix what this issue is. And again, the issue is lack of a career or a skill set for a good civilian job. Again, it doesn't teach them just to go out and flip burgers. It teaches them to go out, whether IT, working on computers, or in my case, biotechnology. And I've seen, and I've seen veterans that already have degrees that for whatever reason they can't do the job no more. Again, a perfect example is a nurse. A nurse in the civilian world goes out to Afghanistan as a combat medic, can't come back and work in the emergency room because they have PTSD. But Voc Rehab can take that and maybe get this person a master's in nursing administration, something where they still get to use the skill set they already have, but just in a different capacity. So that's the biggest program that we have. Everything else becomes more of a tailor to the individual type thing. So overall, that's the big one we have. Does that answer your question?
Next question.
Okay, how can we help reduce the stigma? Because we all know that it's not weakness if you admit that you have a problem, that it's strength, but how can we get that message out more? I think maybe people sharing their stories, and high-profile people sharing their stories can help reduce the stigma.
That's pretty much it, examples. I mean, my job, I'm lucky. I'm also on Elizabeth's team for the first responder outreach team. So I get to go and talk in front of a room full of police officers, sheriff's deputies, whatever, and tell them just how screwed up I really am. Yeah, it's a fun job. But through that, they get the examples of no matter how highly trained you are and how long you've been doing something, everybody's susceptible. The one common denominator is you continue to ignore it long enough, it will come back and bite you. Whether that's, in my case, losing everything and having to realize that I need another set of eyes because my decisions aren't working right, or it could be one of those statistics Elizabeth was talking about, and that's what we're trying to avoid. But the best way is going to be through example. Like I said, a lot of them are afraid how this is going to affect their jobs. You know, you walk around, and a lot of it's because of the media focuses on the negative aspects of PTSD. They focus on these veterans coming back, murdering their spouses, or whatever, going out committing crime sprees or whatever. That's not all PTSD. I guarantee you I have the same symptoms as that person that went out and murdered their family. They manifest differently, and I've learned to not control them, not erase them, but to work with them so that they don't control my quality of life. I still have them. I still have the nightmares. My wife will tell me whether I've had a good night or a bad night. Good night means I slept pretty peacefully. Bad night meant tossing and turning, nightmares all over the place. I still get them. I just don't let them, through the skills and techniques I've learned through the VA, not to control my life the way they used to. And so that helps. And so by doing that, I hope to be able to go out and show other veterans, yes, it's possible, but where a lot of veterans make a mistake, even when they recognize it, is they're expecting the magic pill. They're saying, well, I want to be normal again. They can't even tell you what the hell normal was to begin with. And then they're like, well, I want to do this, but they want to sit in a chair and hopefully it'll come grab them. You have to go out. The resources are there. The people that want to help you are there. You have to go out and put some effort into it, or else you're not going to get anything out of it. And this is where we try to emphasize.
And I think looking at it, just like other health issues. So if someone has diabetes, they'll tell you, they modify their diet, they take medication, they start working out, there's education around it. But with people who are dealing with depression, they're worried they're going to get judged, or people are going to think they aren't trustworthy or they can't do their job. But as Alex said, we know, of course, there are people that have an extreme situation, but there are a lot of people that are still able to do a lot, even with some of these symptoms, and certainly managing it with treatment.
You look at the news any day, believe me, there's a lot of people with mental health issues running around out there. Most of them are in charge of the country.
More questions. I'd like to follow up on that, what the lady said up there about stigma attached to mental health care in the veteran community. The same thing is throughout society.
Yeah.
You're not going to go to the, it's better handled now because you can go down to the counselor in your workplace and get some advice. But generally, if your boss knows that you may have mental problems, it's going to affect your work, at least how long you work there. Now, the other question I have, and I don't know how you people do all that you do, but it seems like it's a little bit downstream of where the problems developed. Doesn't it seem that the military, before you let the veteran out, should have some sort of program to reacclimate the veteran what's available?
So I can tell you, and I know Alex will tell you too. So those programs do exist, and they exist for the exact reason that we're talking about. Be proactive, flag these things before they become a big problem, before a small thing, becomes huge. We've learned risk factors. So especially with the National Guard and Reserve, is after deployment, there's a survey, right? Check anything, do you have this, do you have nightmares, you having this, you having this, yes, no, yes, no. And this is before, right when they've gotten off the plane. And if anyone says yes, they're not going home. They're gonna get pulled back to be evaluated. So no one says yes, right? And then they get back to Massachusetts and there's several post-deployment exams and weekends, almost like a full conference. They're called yellow ribbon events, where there's the VA, there's all veteran resources. It's like a table of, a whole conference room of tables, and they get to see a mental health provider and a medical provider 3 months after their deployment. But even then, people are very unlikely to kind of register the information, because I go to those events and I do those briefings, right? And I look into the audience and everyone's like, yeah, I don't have that issue. And this is not my priority and I don't want to say anything. So there's a little bit more visibility. Like, for example, people know what the VA is. They see us consistently. So I figure if I can talk to this person, maybe by the 10th time, they'll decide to call me. And they do. But usually at the moment, they're not going to identify it.
But I mean, in other words, you have these people in your grasp as the military. You instruct them prior to their being discharged or let loose. And you just, I don't know, it takes a week or whatever, you tell all the guys, this is the kind of thing you're going to face when you're going back home.
Oh, yeah.
Your family life's going to be different, jobs are going to be different. Now they all have a clue. The ones that have a problem may come to you earlier, that's all.
Well, it's like anything, the reality of it's considerably different than the good intentions behind it. Like there's actually more stuff available now than there was when I came back. When I came back, like Elizabeth said, and this is before I even left the Middle East, fill out this form. Have you seen dead bodies? Were they friendly? Were they coalition? Were they civilians? Blah, blah, blah. Of course we all did. We just went through an invasion. Everybody, nope, 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 nope. Because we knew that that was going to keep us in the happy fun land for longer while somebody transferred around. And again, it's not like they have mental health, at least at that time, they didn't have mental health professionals all over in every unit. So there was no telling how long you were going to have to wait before you were reevaluated. When I came back and my symptoms started, there were other things that occurred after I came back that helped magnify them. But when I first started noticing mine, I just knew something wasn't right. I went down to the clinic, told the doctor, it was an Air Force doctor, said, hey, you got this, give me a bottle of Xanax and told me to call him in the morning. Now, okay, great, that, you know, well, yeah, it feels good when you take it, but fortunately I've never been involved in drugs, so I was like, I ain't taking this crap, and flushed them. There's a lot of happy fish in the Potomac right now, I'll tell you that. So that's, you know, that was the extent of it. And again, you still have the culture of, I'm in denial because it's a sign of weakness. If you're heavy, if you're high in the ranks, I can't let those below me know that I have the same stuff, which is ridiculous, but those below, they don't maybe not understand what's going on. They start manifesting and do things normal 21-year-olds do. They go out and get hammered all the time and start acting crazy, but they're doing it excessively than what they would have been doing had they not had PTSD. So,
but it is a start. It's just exposing people to the information as early as possible. Even if it doesn't apply, if we repeatedly talk about these things, our hope is we will eventually be able to engage them in care. So at least it's acknowledged now.
So, okay, I think we're going to have to wrap up. George, Warren, Kristen.
So,
and then that'll have to be it. Okay, go.
so that's all well and good to do the social work. But historically, we know that people that are in traumatic situations don't have any interest in talking about it. Mm-hmm. We know their friends and the rest of society are curious about it, need to understand it. What tools are available? Are there books? Are there videos? How do you, if you're not sitting with a social worker, how do you educate and inform those who have not been in it, what it's like, those who have been in it, how to respond?
Good question. There are a lot of books and there's a lot of information out there. There's actually a hotline for families called Coaching into Care that can help them support a loved one. There's family counseling, family support groups. Those things do exist. I'm happy to send the information to Linda and have her disperse it. I think the challenge is finding it, right? So there's a lot of research, there's a lot of support out there on different websites and different books. Some are certainly better than others. It's making sure that people know about it and know how to find it that I think is the trick.
I was wondering if a elderly veteran could come in for help, the type of services that you offer, if their problem is not deployment related, it's something that has happened in, the span of their employment.
Good question. So as long as they are eligible for VA health care, they can be seen for anything. So of course we're focusing on post-deployment and combat issues because that's the topic of our talk. However, we see a lot of veterans that have health issues, including trauma and mental health, who didn't deploy, that had nothing to do with their deployment or their service, but as long as they're eligible for VA health care, they can be seen for anything.
Are all veterans eligible?
Good follow-up question. So there are a couple ways veterans can use their VA benefits and be eligible, and part of it depends on when and how long they served in the military, what type of discharge they received when they exited the service, and their financial income. So there's a couple of ways that veterans can be eligible. Some have a VA disability rating, others are recently home from a deployment. So if anyone's interested specifically for themselves or someone they know, we can talk separately, but they do need their discharge papers from the military, and there is a small application to see if they are eligible. Not all veterans are eligible completely. It is individual based on those factors, and it is separate from the military. So we only see veterans, it's not an extension of the military's insurance, TRICARE, and people get confused around that as well. We have eligibility specialists at the VA that take walk-ins. People can apply online, over the phone. by mail. There's a couple of different ways to find out if you're eligible for care.
And last but not least.
Hi, this is, I'm a professor at a medical school, and about 10% of my students are veterans, and they are exceptional, but I often, similar to what you said, they often won't come to me for help, and their grades aren't as high. I mean, they do fine, but they're not as high because they've been out of school for a certain amount of time. Is there a way I can be more approachable for these students? We also have about 10% students on military scholarship, but it's the veteran students that I notice sometimes just won't come to me, you know, and I know they can be doing even better than I do.
Yeah, we talk a lot with student veterans and the different colleges that we have affiliations with in the area to see how we can better support our veteran students, because they may be dealing with a different set of challenges in the classroom that they may have not even acknowledged, or they do, but they're balancing a lot. So we use the example a lot, and Alex, I'm sure, can speak to this too, even just something as basic as where to sit in your classroom. They might not be able to hear you very well because of some hearing damage, so they want to sit right up front, but it's really stressful for them to have all those students behind them. So then they sit in the back, but they can't hear you. So my suggestion would be just talk with them, you know. A lot of veterans feel uncomfortable if the teacher is like, hey, you're a veteran, what do you think about the recent situation we saw on the news? Or tell us about this, feeling really put on the spot and then a distance from their colleagues. So, you know, maybe acknowledging that there's veterans in the classroom and then asking them if there's anything that they need, whether it's written material so they have a visual to follow along with, or audio material if they process information that way, or seeing if they've slept before your class. If it's an 8 a.m. class and you have people falling asleep, it's probably not because you're boring them. So I think it's individualized.
How much sleep did you get before a test?
Well.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Thank you.
I'm a long-time user of the Bedford VA. I couldn't ask for a better doctor, dentist, or mental health care. I'm very, very satisfied with the Bedford VA. They've been excellent to me for many, many years.
We are happy to hear that.
It comes down to, there are actually, between Bedford, or the VA in general, and the state, there are so many different veteran resources out there for education, employment, training, that no one or two individuals within the organization know all of them. What we do is try to facilitate getting that veteran to somebody who does know what they need for their particular case. And in the case of education, if they're having issues, we actually have a program that deals specifically with veteran students and bridging the gap between the students and the faculty. So we have programs for practically everything, except winning the lottery.